All
Looks
right,
good on
team.
our
I
end.
think it worked.
Awesome. That is very exciting. We can do hard
Well,
things.
we can do hard things. And technology, I think, is on our side today. But
Yes.
welcome everyone to our illuminated conversation. I'm going to see if I can. Okay. I was still getting some feedback in the background as we're streaming on two platforms, but I think we are good to go. But again, welcome to everyone joining us for today's Illuminated conversation. We are the Lumen Group and really just excited to be here with you all. If you joined us earlier this month, you know our theme is around connection and really the power that connection can have in the workplace, how it helps to mitigate stress, promotes a sense of well-being, but helps us to be more effective and engaged in our work and the teams that we're a part of. So with that, today is going to be the opportunity to continue the conversation as we really explore the role of micro connections and how those really support our resilience in the workplace. So today I am joined by two of my colleagues, Dr. Megan Broger, Lumen's president and founder, and Donnie Hobbs, who is a senior consultant on our team. As we think about the work we do and what maybe makes us different from other firms who do similar types of work, we really see it as integrating our knowledge of psychology, neuroscience, and biology to help us to think about stress in the workplace in a bit of a different way. How we can really engage and regulate from a nervous system perspective, allowing us to be really more connected, centered, effective, and how we communicate with one another and ultimately contribute to the workplace climate. As part of our work, in addition to teaching, sharing, research, and insights that we have, it's also important for us to engage in that experiential component, really getting you a sense of different practices that we can engage in that really help support us regulating our nervous system, but support our abilities to be even more effective in the workplace. So I'm going to lead us through a 30-second connection practice. And if you joined us during our last Illuminated conversations, this might sound a bit familiar, but I think it's important for us to also get repetition to be able to engage consistently in different practices to really start to showcase some of their benefit and the impacts. So I'm going to have you go ahead and take a moment to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so or in a place that you can. Otherwise, just go ahead and soften your gaze. And we're going to start by just connecting to our breath and taking a deep breath in and a slow breath out. Now bring to mind someone in your workplace. This could be a colleague, a mentor, or even someone maybe you haven't interacted with or connected with in a while. And as you visualize this person, think of one positive quality they bring to your work environment. Could be things like their reliability, problem solving, or maybe even just their kindness or compassion, the way that they show up or their presence in that space. And allow yourself to feel a sense of appreciation for that person, that strength, or ways that they positively influence your work environment. And imagine what it would be like to express that appreciation to them, how that might strengthen your connection. Now hold on to that feeling for just a few more seconds. Now coming back to that breath, take one more deep breath in and release it slowly. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes, carrying with you or carrying forward that sense of connection and appreciation. And I'm going to pause for a moment. Donnie or Megan, what did you notice as you engaged in that activity? And for those of you joining virtually, drop into the chat. We'd also love to hear from you. What came up as you went through the exercise?
Good question, Emily. That was great. One thing that came up for me as I was, moving into that conversation around expressing gratitude for how this person shows up is I should do that. I should do that. That it feels good to think about, and I'm sure it would feel even better to hear. And it would build, those types of small, whether it's a token of appreciation or just a word of appreciation, really builds connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't come up with a good reason not to do it. So after our session today, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brought to mind for me so often now as I'm, in a restaurant or out in public anywhere, I'm cueing in on a lot of like, I appreciate you. Like that phrase is kind of coming up. And while that sounds nice, it kind of falls flat because there isn't the because of, or that like the follow through of imagining what it is that you appreciate and providing them with that specificity as a way of adding some depth, adding some weight to that connection.
Yeah, I can think back on a workplace I was part of where leaders on a regular basis would write handwritten thank you cards.
Yeah.
And I probably somewhere in my office have a little stack of them, but it is really that specificity. And maybe on those days where it is more challenging and you're like, gosh, what's going well, to pull out that stack and know I do add value to a team, or I do feel connected to that leader because they see and recognize some of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I think there's such value in that when we can be really specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking how powerful for those of us here joining today to really think about what one of those simple actions could really do and impact things more broadly in your workplace and perhaps even beyond. So as we start the conversation today, I'm reminded of an article that Megan, you had shared last time, which was the Work and Wellbeing Initiative, which is a joint task force between Harvard and MIT Research for Action Initiative. And what they're really talking about is the quality of our social relationships in the workplace really matter. And it's not just that, connections feel good, or to do that connection exercise, it gives me the good feels. That they really talk about connecting that back to research on the so what, how that really promotes that sense of belonging and effective teaming. It improves worker well-being and also protects around those harmful elements of chronic or workplace stress. But they also get into the research around how happier, healthy employees, which this probably should be surprising, are less likely to call out sick when we think about the cost of medical insurance or cost to that, the use of it. But then they also have some statistics around the likelihood that those individuals would quit that organization or quit that role. And so the so what, or why behind connection, is really those things. But today we wanted to get in a bit around, if we can understand the importance of connection, how do we actually do that in a meaningful way, day in and day out? Especially when we think about the ways our schedules are jam-packed. We're going from meeting to meeting. I think intuitively we know, we should be doing those things, but it doesn't always make it to the top of the to-do list. And so what we're hoping to do today is to really talk about how we can do those things within the flow of work, as opposed to adding that to maybe another stressful thing in the workplace itself.
Mhm.
So what are micro connections? If we could define or really break that down a bit. And maybe Megan, you want to start us off there.
Yeah, sure. When we talk about micro connections, we think about that in terms of the smallest of moments, whether it's a smile, a hello, a quick chat in your Teams or whatever IM platform you're using, saying, "Hey, good morning. Need any help today?" Those kind of small bids for connection, for kind of openness, and they can be a few seconds at a time. And so I think sometimes we don't we we hesitate to kind of step into connection because we feel like, well, I don't have 15 minutes, or I don't have half an hour, or I don't have this kind of extended period of time, which is understandable. And so we just don't do it. But imagine the difference between being intentional about the days that you are in the office, walking by a colleague and just smiling or saying good morning. And you do that a handful of times, and then you see them outside the office at a conference or at an event. What's the likelihood that you're going to have a greater sense of comfort, of knowledge, of familiarity with that person, such that you will then have the opportunity to have that longer conversation? And that there is a difference there between that familiarity, just based on some of those micro connections, and how you might feel towards a complete stranger. So it's just these small opportunities to create kind of a shared experience, whether that again is something verbal, something nonverbal, electrons, and in an IM platform, or something else.
As you were providing some of those examples, what also came to mind for me was around this idea of expectation. And I think sometimes if we know connection could be helpful, or these micro connections might be helpful, we're balancing that with the expectation of what am I maybe desiring, and what might that also lead to? Do I have time to really smile or say hi, because I might not know how the conversation might unfold. And so I'm wondering, Donnie, if you maybe have some thoughts or reactions to that, how we manage that balance between wanting to connect, but also managing expectations and boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think it gets into, and we won't take a deep dive here, but I think it gets into the complexity of how relationships work. And, as you were saying that, I think all of us have probably experienced that, right? Where we don't have time to really stop. If I make eye contact and say hi to this person in the hall, I don't have time for a conversation. I'm on my way, and so there comes into play a boundary issue, right? How do I navigate that effectively to keep the relationship where we want it? But I think the micro connections are so important, especially in a context like that, because micro connections are a metric. They're a gauge for how things are going, not only between me and this other person, but maybe as a team or as an organization. And so they're really critical to be able to get a sense of what's going on interpersonally and within the context of the group. And when we don't take time to make eye contact or say hi, or give someone a greeting, whether that's at work or Megan, you were talking about you've been going out and kind of listening, and there's this phrase, hey, I appreciate you, which is great. And sometimes it does feel just like a phrase, because when you go up to the coffee counter and you ask the person taking your order how they're doing, what I found is often they're kind of taken aback. They're like, what was that? And it's these kind of connections, I think, that are so important, whether it's somebody behind the counter or somebody at work. And so, yeah, figuring out how do I manage my time, my energy, in a way that's effective when working with these micro connections and being intentional at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, you had mentioned that often micro connections are kind of overlooked.
Yeah.
As we talk about, culture, team cohesion, how we build that sense of connectedness. Why do you all think that is, or in some of your observations? Why isn't this maybe a strategy that is talked about more often?
I wonder if part of it has to do, Donnie, with what you just brought up in terms of, and Emily, this kind of related to expectation management and boundary setting. Because what I think, and we've talked about this as a part of an internal team that we're hearing from our clients and even some of our colleagues, is that there seems to be in kind of an emerging or very present tension between taking time to connect and getting stuff done. And that if you do one, you risk the other. And so that's a pretty dangerous dichotomy if we're saying, do we connect or do we be productive? And I think what that really challenges is the necessity of connection for productivity. Connection is the basis of trust building. Connection is the basis of effective and efficient communication. Connection is the basis of resilience in teams. And so without those things, how productive will we be able to be long term? Not to mention the fact that having meaningful connections at work, and this isn't about having friendships, so when we're saying connection, we're not saying build friendships. We're saying build meaningful, authentic, mutually beneficial, and respectful relationships with people at work. And, this is, in the absence of that, those meaningful connections at work, retention rates also decline. And so there's so many things wrapped up into it. But I think, to your original question, Emily, that tension that we're seeing between taking the time to connect and being productive is a dangerous one.
Well, and as you were sharing, Megan, what came to mind for me is shifting what we view as productive.
Yeah.
When I've had those chances to really collaborate or connect with people, I often find that the work is faster. It's often better. But it is, I think we often see it in a very dichotomous way.
Yep. Yep.
And then I'm thinking, wow, we could go off on a tangent on that just solely. But if we bring it back a little, I know both of you have been sharing some examples of what micro connection could look like, in person. But I'm also wondering, in this hybrid world that we're all navigating and continue to operate within, if there are ways that we could do that. What does micro connection look like in this hybrid world?
You have thoughts on that, Donnie?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to kind of team culture and expectations, being able to communicate and connect in a way that aligns with either the other person or the team that you're working with. And so maybe that has to do with, having a conversation around boundaries. When am I available and what's acceptable, and is it, is it okay to check in with someone? And trying to find that balance of seeking connection versus providing support, and just in whatever way that looks like, in order to provide the idea that, hey, I'm here for you. If you need anything, feel free to reach out, without turning it into, this big social engagement, which I think sometimes people fear will happen. And they're like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And so having some upfront conversations around, hey, what does this look like? How do we want to move forward as a team? So that there's a common understanding, can be one way to facilitate some positive connection and openness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I was just going to say, it makes me think even of your earlier comment, Megan, even that good morning to the team, right? On your Slack channel, whatever, avenue that you all communicate. We just had a conversation internally at the Lumen Group earlier this week around
Mhm.
the intent behind that, right? Is to say, hi, good morning, or I'm available for connection. And we created some shorthand around that. But to know that as an internal team, it's not about, hey, I'm checking to see who's online. So when we have that level of trust, it makes a big difference. And to also be intentional about the rules around how we engage one another.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to kind of what came to mind for me along the same lines as what you were talking about, Donnie, was just the importance of establishing some sort of team norms
Mhm.
around that. What are the different needs of the people on the team in terms of connection? Not everybody has the same level of need, but that doesn't mean that no connection is useful.
Mhm.
And so, we can respect those differences, but what are the ways in which people are open to and can accept and respect different forms of connection? So, having a conversation as a team around what that could look like, what people don't want it to look like, and then having a shared understanding of what it is and what it means when it happens.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, we can maybe define what this looks like for ourselves, or maybe some of the micro connection practices that we're going to commit to. I'm wondering for the leaders that are joining us here today, what might be ways that they foster that, not only with themselves and their direct team or direct reports, but across the team that they support? How do they make that a part of just a part of the culture of that team so that it is a more consistent practice?
Mhm. That's a great question, Emily. I think one of the things that I've found to be particularly successful as a leader is making sure that, again, kind of going back to the centered leadership model, that I'm regulated and that I can model that. Because if other people see me dysregulated or not engaging or missing out on those micro connections, that is generally then what follows, right? Everybody else kind of falls into that same pattern. And so I think starting with, what helps me center or regulate can be really effective. And I'm, going into the day, that's really important. But also if I get off of a tough call and I don't take a minute to center and I go down the hall to the fax machine, everybody I pass, right, is going to see and read into my lack of eye contact, my head down, the pace that I'm walking. And so I think it's really important just to come back to those basics of like resetting throughout the day, doing whatever that takes so that I am centered and open. So that would be my recommendation to folks that as a first step. Megan, what else, or what would you say?
Yeah, that's such a powerful first step, and just further reinforces how this idea of micro connection isn't necessarily just about words, but it's about behaviors, it's about nonverbals. And even if we are not intending to communicate something, we are. So it's very helpful if we understand what that is that we're sending out. Another thing, I think, going back to that piece about maybe a systemic or a team climate or even an organizational kind of culture around that dichotomy between connection and productivity. As a leader, what would it be like to invite some conversation with the team around what does being productive look like in our team? What are the things that people value? What are the things that people need? And how can we build that in to the dynamics and the expectation? Because as Donnie mentioned, it really is a metric of a team's performance, because as humans, we are biologically wired to kind of isolate and preserve if we are threatened, and we are open and, engaged when we are safe. and we're feeling rewarded and reinforced. And so trying to have those conversations very openly and explicitly with your team around what does productivity look like? How can we make sure we're building in time for connection, for collaboration, for communication in ways that are useful to the team, and incorporate that into the day-to-day work, whether that's when people are in the office or they're virtual.
Mhm.
I also think about integrating that into meetings. We often spend a lot of time in meetings, and that can be just a prime. We already have people together, but that opportunity to infuse some of those opportunities for different types of connection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
With our last question here, I'm wondering if either of you have an example of micro connections or maybe teams you've worked with that have committed to these practices and what impact that's had on the team.
Yeah, I can jump in. A team that we recently worked with was noticing some increased conflict and some decreased kind of understanding in their interactions with each other. And as we explored that dynamic with them, it became clear that what was missing was this kind of connective tissue, this ability to really understand, to be curious rather than judgmental about the people on the team, what they were doing, what they weren't doing. And so part of their kind of their path through this was to commit to saying good morning when they were in the office together. It was to commit to saying, hey, everybody, I'm online. Here's where I'm available. You can catch me at these times if anybody needs help. So those small interactions done consistently over a short period of time actually has led to fewer conflicts and increased understanding because there's more benefit of the doubt happening in this team now, that there is something other than the technical work that they're doing that is bringing them together, and it's creating that safety net. So there's a little bit of room for error because nobody's perfect every time, right? But that room for error was something that they were noticing. They were noticing what wasn't happening, not what was. And so some of these small connections of good mornings, going round the table in the beginning of meetings, sharing a success that they've had or that they've seen somebody else have, and using their IM tool to let people know they were online and what was going on for them during the day. Those three things done consistently over a relatively short period of time had significant impacts for them as it related to decreasing conflict and increasing communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's power in that team committing to those actions and having that accountability, and maybe to be a bit inspired by that work, Megan. I'm going to ask that each of us just take a moment to pause and think about what's one thing you can commit to doing this week. That might be one of the examples that have been shared here today, one way that you could engage in that micro connection. And jot that down. You can feel free to even drop it into the chat if you want maybe some shared accountability with the group here today. But again, to think about how that seemingly small action can have a really big impact. And I think expanding impact as maybe other people start to witness or notice these, get that sense or feeling of connection and have that expand outwards. Well, our time always goes very fast on these illuminated conversations. So Megan and Donnie, appreciate your time and perspective here today. And for everyone joining us, again, committing to some of those actions, but we appreciate the connection here today. Save the date for our next illuminated conversation, which will be Friday, September 13th. Yes, Friday the 13th, we're going to have a little fun. Often we talk about stress in the workplace, but we know that things outside of work can also sometimes influence or come into the workplace even when we try our best for that not to occur. And as we're honoring that season of back to school, we all have, maybe shifts in responsibilities, calendars, activities. And so we're going to be talking about how we can navigate through that transition as we're navigating new things or schedules, and how that might have impacts to the workplace and what we can do to really mitigate that. So again, thanks so much for joining. We look forward to seeing you in September. And as always, follow us on LinkedIn for latest information from our team. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for being here.